My name is Oscar Hernandez. Today we're going to be covering information around the census, as what is the census and how we can support you through Houston in Action. I first would like to go over a bit of the agenda. I'm going to do a small introduction. I know we have a small group here, and maybe we can take like the first minute or so of this discussion to just say your name and maybe something you're grateful for today. And then we can go into the history of the census, why the census matters, especially why it matters right now, then social distancing and getting counted. So who would like to go first? I can remember if you want to unmute yourself, it's as simple as pressing the unmute button on your screen, or for those who are on the phone, you can just press *6 and we'll unmute you. So I can start us off if it's easier. Like I introduced myself already, Oscar Hernandez. I'm the community organizer at Houston in Action, and I am grateful for my dog today because he's been with me all morning trying to get set up this whole Zoom call. I hope he can take a break though, so he'll let me work. Who would like to go next?
My name is Diana Weiss, and I'm grateful to be able to learn how to use Zoom today.
Yay. Thank you, Diana.
This is Lee and Bob Ardell.
Hello.
Hello. And we're grateful. What are we grateful for?
To have good health.
That we're healthy and that we're both in this together and that we get the access to things like this today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bob and Lee.
Hi, Jonathan and Crystal Davis here. We're grateful for beautiful weather and beautiful people and an opportunity to do this.
Thank you, Crystal. I think we might have one other person on the call. It's fine if you don't want to speak, don't worry. But if you feel like jumping in at any point, please feel free to jump in. And for anyone who might be calling in via phone, remember *6 is the number to press so you can unmute yourself. Okay, so we're gonna get started. We're gonna jump in. So let me see. In your end from the screen, I want to make sure that I can see. Oh, here we go. So like I said, I am a community organizer with Houston in Action. I've done a lot of work around immigrant rights for over 10 years. And my role as a community organizer in Houston in Action is to be able to empower and support the organizers we work with. But from what I do want to share about my history is that I'm undocumented. I've been undocumented most of my life in this country, and I can share that when I was about, well, I used to live in Scranton, Pennsylvania most of my childhood. People only know Scranton, Pennsylvania because of The Office and Michael Scott. I think outside of that, it's the place where Joe Biden, I think, was born. That is the only two things that people know about Pennsylvania whenever I talk to them. But I grew up there most of my life, and the streets in Pennsylvania are different than Houston. Most of the streets actually have alleys in the back of, like in between every city block. And when we were kids, my mother, she actually got me, my younger brother, well, me, my older brother, and my younger sister, and she took us out of the apartment in which we lived in. She took us to the back to an alley, and she said, if you ever see, she took us and lined us up like a row of ducks, and she told us, if you ever see your father and I being taken into a big white bus, she said, I want you to walk to your grandmother's house. She said, don't run. She said, walk. And at the time, I didn't know what she meant when she said that, because I took the school bus every morning. And I thought she was just being dramatic. Like I couldn't understand the concept of what her fear was coming from. But as I got older and understood that, and as a child, the lesson that it instilled in me is that it doesn't matter if you're good or bad or how you behave. It's just the simple act of participating in something could cause you or someone in your family to disappear. And I grew up with that fear and that anxiety most of my life. But as I got older, I also got involved in different organizing and movement, and I found that even though we're undocumented, there's a lot of people who care about us in our community, and there's a lot of things that we can do. The photo here you're seeing is photos of a lot of friends and people who I consider my family too. A lot of them are my nephews and my nieces, and photos of my mother and the organization I used to work with. And the reason I do the work that I do is because I want to inform our community. I want to make sure that our community are well educated, that they understand how the system works and how the role that they have to play within the system. And that hopefully we can empower people to participate more and more. So for today's call, I have an ask for all of you is that as we consider the families who are going to be impacted not only by the census, but by how we're moving forward with the next 10 years with the funding and the impact that it's causing the community. The ask is that I keep those people in mind as we start talking about how the census impacts us. And when you ask a question, think about how they're being affected and how the knowledge that you can share is going to support them. So yes, thumbs up. And I might I might laugh a little right now just because my dog won't stop biting me, but we can keep going on. So Houston in Action. Houston in Action is a collective impact organization. By that, I mean that we work with over 50 members, member organizations who do all kinds of nonprofit work within the within Harris County. Hi, Mickey.
Hi. Sorry, I'm late.
It's okay. It's okay. We kicked off a little early, so it's not a problem at all. Can you possibly mute yourself so we can hear? But if you do have any questions at any point, please feel free to jump in. On every screen, when you look at it, when you look at it, you'll have a button that'll let you see to a little microphone and a little camera, so you can decide to mute or unmute yourself. But okay, we can get started. So Houston in Action, where we are a collective impact organization, and by that I mean that we can y'all see the PowerPoint? Okay. So we are a collective impact organization, and by that is that I mean that we have our interest is to be able to support the community and everything that the community needs. And the way we do it is that we work with all these different organizations that are part of the community. And one of the big challenges that we have is that we acknowledge that there are systemic barriers that do not allow our community to live a full civic life. We want to address those barriers and support the community to fight against those barriers so people can participate. But through a lot of the work that we do, when I talk about our membership, it's not just about me or the people I work with, through our Community Action Council and through our organizers. It's also the different community leaders and organizations that are across Harris. This right here is a photo of the Houston Action Academy. This is when we onboarded 13 organizers in September. These organizers are working for different organizations across the greater Houston area. But we also work with organizations that have like different fields of work with different audiences, including organizations like Living Hope Wheelchair Association, organizations like Baker Ripley, MGAGE, who focuses on helping Muslim and Asian communities. We're working with even smaller organizations like within the Ethiopian community, BPSOS, Chinese community centers, and much, much more. So our hope is to be able to provide a collective impact together with different organizations to be able to make a change in our community. But what we're going to jump in today, we're going to do the census. So one of the things that we're going to do is highlight how within the history of the census before we get started. And the reason we talk about the history of the census as well is so we can so we can ground ourselves we're talking and why we're talking about the census the way we do. So the census goes back actually a very, very long time. You can take it back to ancient Greece, and even the Incas counted the people that lived in their country. And I do want to highlight that that a lot of the reasoning for counting the people who live in the country had more to do with the resources. But the U.S. was one of the first countries to actually use this and connect this to direct power, to direct political power. As y'all might already know, the representatives per state actually is counted based on the number of people that live in the state. So in other words, you get more seats in the House based on the population within the state. And this was actually one of the first time that the census was manipulated. So in the southern states in the 1800s, they still have a lot of people who were incarcerated, enslaved, and these black bodies were actually not considered human. But in order for southern states to actually gather and gain more political power, they counted these the population of slaves, black bodies who were enslaved, as 3/5 human in order to gain a larger population. And this was one of the first manipulations in order to get more political power in southern states, because they wanted to have more seats in the House. But it didn't stop there. Through the time, as time passed by, there was a number of ways to not only get more people overcounted, but get certain communities undercounted. And one of the big impacts that we saw by using the census data was that during World War II, the Japanese Americans that lived in the U.S. were actually arrested and taken into internment camps. And the way they were able to do this was by actually using census data. We're going to talk about something called Title 13 a little bit later on, but essentially, due to this, the Supreme Court ruled that the census information was not going to be shared outside of the Bureau, and that it cannot be used against the citizens. So even though that was a horrible thing that happened, that we want to assure that it doesn't continue to happen and that it won't affect the communities anymore. Now, I know we might have not expected to dive deeply into like the dark side of the census and what's happening, and this might not be the opening place of what we wanted to have a discussion. But the reason we bring it up in Houston in Action as much as we do is because we want to acknowledge that when we're talking about our communities and the people who are disenfranchised and why they are less likely to participate, there is a lot of historical context to it. So it's not just that people don't want to participate or that people are lazy. It's really that that this has a deep effect in our community, and it has had a deep effect for years. And this is part of the barriers that our communities are facing. So we bring it up to acknowledge that I've been to actual trainings before, and I have met people who had relatives who were in internment camps and who had uncles actually who are still alive today who remember that. So I'm not talking about things that happened so long ago. These are things that are that still impact our communities today. And when we think about how we talk about the census, especially as we work with our communities of color and our disenfranchised community and our communities who low-income households like myself, we want to make sure that people are informed properly and that they understand what their participation looks like. Houston in Action, we're a nonpartisan organization, but if you want to check out more of the slides from this artist, Ariel, I can never say her name properly, but you can go to citylab.com and you can get all the slides to her presentation as it dives deeper into the different historical context of the census. Now, as we move forward, when we think about who are the undercounted folks within our county and our city, we know that renters ages 0 to 5, which is specifically young children, which we'll talk a little bit more about, ages 18 to 24, foreign-born, limited English proficiency, which I think is like a fancy way to say non-English speakers, Latinx, Asian Americans, non-citizens, homeless, Harvey victims, formerly incarcerated and persons with felonies, limited internet access, LGBTQ. So I bring up all these different, all these are the folks that we acknowledge that have been historically disenfranchised within our city. How many of y'all on the call, so you can show your thumbs, know somebody that fits it? Any one of these descriptions? There's either a renter. Yeah, so we all know somebody who fits one or more of those descriptions, or we ourselves have fit one of those descriptions, whether. And understanding that that in Texas, the population is over 6 million, and that in people. So I know this talks about hard to count, and hard to count is a phrase that's used within the Census Bureau. But the reason they say hard to count is they believe that hard to count areas are areas where people are less likely to answer to the census. As Houston in Action, and we talk about the under community because and for me as an organizer, language is extremely important, and there's a difference between calling a community a hard to count area, which is a group of folks who do not know, who do not want to participate, versus undercounted for communities, which in my mind also recognizes that these communities have been disenfranchised and don't have access to information, and that they haven't been properly resourced to understand the impact it is as in a community. So we're gonna go into the census and why it matters. Again, if at any point anyone has any questions or wants to give a comment, you can feel free to unmute yourself, and we'll be more than happy to talk about it. But before we jump into why the census matter, I want to give a big shout out to Naleo, who is an amazing organization who's put a lot of presentations together around the census, and that we partner with them a lot. Naleo is an amazing resource, specifically for Latino communities, and we'll be able to find more resources from them on our website. So how many of y'all, you can show your thumbs up, if you think that the census is completely optional? Anyone here? So I feel some people are thinking about it. Like if participating on the census is optional or not.
Not optional.
Not optional. Thank you, Sam. Yes, the census is actually a constitutional mandate. As you can see, most of the times when I ask a question, they're going to be on the screen. The answers are going to be right there for you. So the census is a constitutional mandate, which means that everyone who lives in the country has to answer this. And this is intentional to get not only the number of people that are within the country, but because it affects commerce, it affects, like we stated before, political power, and it actually sets the state of the country for the next 10 years. So this is huge, the impact that this has in our country. And one of the things to remember is, as we think about how the effects that this is going to be in our country, is that within a 10-year period, it's going to dictate the amount of federal fundings that go into different communities. So to put that in understanding a little bit better, you might find different numbers for this, anywhere from 60 to 80 billion. It's really depends on how people calculate the amount of funding and where it goes to. But what it does determine, especially the funding that goes into schools, services, essential services. So in other words, if the school lunches that your children get, the roads, so if there's a lot of potholes, hospitals, all that is to be affected by the census, and determining how much funding will go into those communities. Federal programs like Head Start, CHIP, WIC, and Medicaid. This is huge because, in other words, if there is a community who has a lot of children and they depend on a Head Start program, to be able to work, and the Head Start program supports them with taking care of these children, and if they don't count the right amount of children within that neighborhood, that funding is going to go to another neighborhood, which means that they would ultimately have to travel across the travel just to be able to to drop their kid off to a Head Start program, which they had in their neighborhood. And I often talk to the community a lot about this because 60 billion is like a huge number. Like it's difficult to conceptualize. But to keep in mind that we're talking about somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000, $1,500 to $2,000 per person within a county. So within a 10-year period, you're talking about something upwards of $15,000 per person. So that's the amount of funding that ultimately might go into people's neighborhoods or might leave and go into other neighborhoods. And like we stated too about determining political representation. So how many, well, in Texas, actually, we have the potential to gain up to 3 seats in the state, in Congress. So these are 3 congressional seats if more people get counted within Texas. If I were to ask you to guess how much funding do you think Texas has given into the census, what would y'all think? Anyone have an idea? Not sure? So Texas is actually giving 0 funding into supporting to make sure everyone gets counted. And even though that means that as we live in the state, that there is a likelihood of not gaining these 3 congressional seats, which means the state of Texas will ultimately not gain political power because people are not properly counted here. So all the funding that we have here is based on the organizations and nonprofits and philanthropy in order for us to be able to do the work that we're doing around the census. I just saw a cat run by Mickey's screen, so I'm not the only one with a pet. But I bring this up because the Census Bureau has also made it clear that that the census will ultimately, when people respond to the census, they will, one second. When people respond to the census, they anticipate that this might be the first time in a long time, or the first time in history that more people will have an other option when or answer other when it comes to the race and ethnicity question. So as the population is shifting, the population is changing, and Houston in Action, we talk about systemic barriers that impact the undercounted communities. This is essentially what we mean, that there is no funding from the state of Texas to make sure people get counted, that there is, the population is shifting a lot, and that Texas is risking not gaining these 2 or 3 congressional seats by not counting people. And we don't think that that's necessarily an accident or a coincidence. So, and as we talked about earlier about how communities have been disenfranchised to participate and how not.
Excuse me, Oscar?
Yes.
Is it too late to appeal to the state that we should be funding the census?
Well, as we get further through the presentation, the census counting already started. So the process to allocate funding to it would probably be, will not be an easy task. So I don't think that there's necessarily a possibility that Texas will say, now we're gonna allocate money to it. But given of what's happening with COVID, which we're also talking about right now, with coronavirus, that might change. But I highly doubt it, to be honest with you. Does that answer the question? Yes? No? I just want to make sure it was clear. So if you were asking is if it's too late for Texas to allocate money, it might be the only, I mean, it definitely is too late, but because of COVID, there might be a switch.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Mickey. So an accurate count for fair census, again, this is breaking down into all, this is in huge amount of resources. When we're talking about like 361 in the billions for Medicaid and all the programs that are affected to this, especially for people who need this, even from Section 8 housing to children's health insurance programs. Like this is huge. It's an enormous sum of money. But whenever we talk to the community, what we want to keep in mind is what is impacting them. So I always say bring it back to the community's values. If their value is because they have children, or is it because they care about political power, like what is it that they value, and then how do we message this to the community? Because to tell someone that there's $13 billion in state health insurance that might not be allocated to them, like to most people that just might go over their head. They'll be like, well, why does that matter to me? Like I've never seen that money affect my life. And what we want to be able to do essentially is to be able to connect it to them so they know why this is important and how it impacts them within their community. But it's important for us as people who are out in the community as well to understand the enormous amount of funding that goes into our communities because of the census. So what are the questions on the census? So the census will be asking for the number of people that live in the household. It will be asking for whether those people are residents, whether they rent an apartment, a mobile home, telephone number. Like all that information is requested through the census. The phone number is only asked because in case the Census Bureau needs to contact people, but I will let you know that the Census Bureau does not call people to inquire about census questions. It will ask relationships to the person in the household. By that, I mean, if you're the first person to answer it, then it will ask what relation is number 2 person, number 3, number 4, and so on. When it comes to issues around LGBTQ, the only recognition that the census currently has for the LGBT community is if the people are married to the same sex spouse or not. And that's how they basically would be able to count if someone is LGBTQ. It will be asked around sex, but that's based on birth. So there is no option, other option. The census is binary, so it'll only be male or female, and you do not have another option to respond. When it comes to age, again, for children under 1 year old, write in 0, but I want to know every single age of every person, date of birth, Hispanic origin, and race. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky when we try to answer this, and I get this question a lot too, about what does it mean around ethnicity or race, and then how do the census, what if you don't want to answer them, especially folks within the LGBTQ community who may not identify as male or female, or that might not be how they recognize themselves based on what they were at birth. And where actually the clearest answer and unfortunate answer that I have is that if you do not pick an ethnicity, a race, or if you don't pick your gender identity, the Census Bureau will pick it for you. How they do it, it's going to vary. I don't really understand the entire process. I've been told that it's by your last name or by the neighborhood in which you live in. But historically, they will usually count people who don't pick out a race as white. And there is an other option when it comes to race that people can check. So if you don't identify by one of the 6 options that it has, you can check other, but you also have to fill in the other portion, because if you check other and you don't fill it in, then the Census Bureau will pick your race for you. And I know this can be very tricky and alarming to a lot of people. I also think it is alarming too, which is why we want to make sure that people participate. But as a community organizer, my role is to empower the community to make sure that they are properly informed and that they can make the decisions that they want and what makes more sense, the best sense for them in their community, in their household. So we want people to know what the questions are, how they can answer them, and then for them to make those decisions so they can get counted. And for many people, the census is like the first step to any civic participation, meaning that if they answer the census, they might be more likely to participate in the elections, they're more likely to participate in local elections within a neighborhood or in the community. And this is a big window for them to get recognition for who they are. So if we don't want other people to decide who we are, like this is our chance to make sure that our voice and our bodies are represented as we identify ourselves. Now these are questions that are not on the census. To start off with the citizenship status. We had a big debate last year where the current administration wanted to put a citizenship question in there. And what it was asking was if folks are non-citizens. The Supreme Court ruled against it. So that means that there isn't a question around citizenship or immigration status, neither for the parent or for the child. That's not in the question of the Census Bureau. They will not ask for your social security number. As a matter of fact, if anybody calls you about your social security number, don't give your social security number over the phone. This is not a good practice to have. You want to make sure that your information is private and you're not just passing it out. They're not going to ask about use of public benefits, adoption information, criminal background, no bank account information or payment information, no employment or income or wealth information. None of those questions will be on the census. And we're actually going to go through a video that will go on a step-by-step process on how to do it online shortly. So I'll share that with you in a bit. But what I want to highlight more than anything is that Houston is actually prone to a lot of fraud, unfortunately. In my work of doing immigration work, I've actually seen people charge people for something like a TASFA, for example. TASFA, which is a state financial aid, which you can download the documents for free and you can fill it out. People have actually charged people to fill out those documents or to print them. So it wouldn't surprise me if, for example, some communities who are uninformed or don't know what's happening with the census might actually be might be people who targeting those specific communities in order to get them to pay just to print out the census survey. So we want to make sure that that as we're working with the community, that people are properly informed so people can participate. And then make sure that our communities are not being taken advantage of. So we have a huge opportunity here to support our community and to make sure that people are informed properly and empowered. So when it comes to filling out the census, one of the big things that I get, responses that I've gotten from the Census Bureau was around young children. So young children historically get undercounted in the millions. And when it comes to especially young children in low income households, like we mentioned earlier, like there's money within the billions that we completely go underfunded into those communities, into those children. I often hear from the Bureau though that people forget like that they have kids and that's why they don't fill out the census. I don't think that's true. I think that every parent that I've met will not stop complaining to me about their kids. So I find it really hard to believe that they forget to count their children. I really feel that it has more to do with the fact that this feels like a government, which it is a government form, and people interpret it or think of it as a legal document that you have to be at least 18 years of age to fill out, which you do not. So we want to make sure that the communities are properly informed and know that young children should be counted, and that their children need to get counted in order to get the right resources for their community. So another question that I've gotten also was around what happens when children live in mixed status families or have divorced parents or have biracial children. So that's when the questions come to race and ethnicity, which you can choose the other portion and identify them as they fit. When it comes to living in divorced parents or divorced households, they can literally fill out the census where they currently live. So that is to say that on April 1st, if they are in one of the parents' houses, then that's where they will get counted versus the other. And we want to make sure that all the young children get counted specifically because, like we said, this is a 10-year period of funding that ultimately will affect this child's life for the next 10 years. So if they're at age of 5 right now and they don't get counted through the census, we're talking about funding that goes from preschool to elementary school and even leading up to middle school and possibly to even high school. So that's a huge period, and for them to lose funding because of it, just because they didn't get counted, is a huge it's a huge problem, and which is what it means that what's happening is that when our communities get under resourced. And especially when it comes to young children, because in group quarters, by group quarters, I mean places like prisons, detention centers, housing, like all these different group quarters, those departments will actually count the people within in that space. Meaning that the prison will get, the prisoners will not count their prisoners individually. They will not have to fill out the census. It would be up to the warden or the people who run the prison to make sure everyone there gets counted. And much like many schools, the prisons are federally funded. So what does it mean if prisons get accurately counted, which means more resources are going into prisons? And for those who are aware of the different studies that have happened within the last 10 years, the school to prison pipeline is actually dependent on this, on third grade reading skills. So that means if there's less funding for schools and there's more funding for prisons, that means that funding is ultimately the funding that could be going into our neighborhoods to make sure young children get the education they need ends up being funding into bigger institutions like prisons, and that has one of the huge effect within our community. But I know that excuse me. But as we move forward, there has been a lot of changes within the Census Bureau. The timeline has changed. COVID has had a big impact. And I hope actually all of you are staying safe and clean. I know there's been a lot of panicking around the community. Rightfully so. I'm actually one of the people who are freaking out, so I play it off a little bit. But it's also kind of scary. And then we know that the communities might be closed down for a couple of weeks. And a lot of cities have been shutting down, which also has pushed the Census Bureau to change their timeline and how they're moving forward with the census. So one of the first things to keep in mind is that, that you can still respond to the 2020 census. You can do it online. This is one of the first times that the Census Bureau has ever been accessible through online. And it was one of the most costly, I think, census that they put together. But this online option, which means you can do it from your home, the way it works is that the census will mail people information about the census, including a 12-digit code. And this 12-digit code is what you will use to log into the Census Bureau website. Has anyone here gotten the code yet? Oh, a couple of people have. Me too as well. So,
yes.
Thank you, Sam. Yes, and then by using this code, you'll be able to log into the Census website, fill in the code, and then go step by step to fill out the census. However, if you don't get the code, or if you lost the code, or you just want to answer it right now, it has a response option that allows you to continue through the process by skipping the code question. So it's right at the bottom, and we'll get more into details of that. So currently, there are 3 ways to self-respond. There's the online option, like I just mentioned. There's the paper form, which means that you can fill it through the mail and mail it in. And then there's the phone via Census Questionnaire Assistance. So you can actually call in the Census Bureau and answer the questions over the phone. For people who, well, we're going to talk about enumerators in a bit. But essentially, these are the 3 different methods to answer the census, and we can all do them right now. Currently, the mail is still taking mail. Good thing. My grandmother is very happy because of that. She's one of the few people I know that uses mail. I love her. She always sends me stuff. But if people don't want to mail stuff, they can also call in to the Census Bureau, and I'll give you a lot of phone numbers for that at the end. The deadline for self-respond has been extended to August. It was initially going to end around June, during the end of June, but they extended it to push because in response to the COVID. Group quarters, like I mentioned before, has been delayed. By that I mean that the process to, By that I mean that the idea of getting people counted through the census, where the enumerators would go into the community and talk to people, has changed. Instead, they had planned to count the homeless populations in mid-March. But as a response to COVID, they're no longer going to go into these campgrounds. They're actually pushing that. They moved from sending the enumerators door to door to a different date too, because of the same reason. The enumerators now will be coming out in late April, when they were going to start in mid-March. Mid-May, and now they're pushing it further and further. They don't actually know when they're going to let me rephrase that, sorry. The enumerators were actually going to start in mid-May, but now it's pushed to a different date. And the reason is because people are afraid to open their doors and a stranger comes to the household. And for those who do not want an enumerator to come to their doors, self-responding is the best method of doing it. As I mentioned when we started, I am undocumented, and there's a lot of undocumented communities out there. So it's actually a scary thing for a lot of people to have a government official to come to your house, knock on your door, and ask questions about your family. So the way to avoid this for a lot of us is to be able to self-respond. So that way we make sure that that we are counted, that our communities are properly resourced, and that we don't have to deal with that fear. On the other hand, if people are waiting for an enumerator to come to their door, keep in mind that this might not happen. It might not be the best process in order to get counted, because enumerators, because the Census Bureau is ultimately might not have the funding. I mean, keep this in mind. We're talking about 300 and some million people that are living in this country, and the enumerators are working, would have been working for mid-March from mid-May to June. And now, even though they extended it towards August, that's only leaves us really a couple of months to count everybody, aside from the self-response. So if you really want to get counted, self-responding is the best move to move forward. But if you are waiting for an enumerator to come to your door, we want to make sure that people know how to identify them. And by that, I mean that in order to get, in order for somebody, if somebody comes to your door and you're not sure if they're enumerators, if you're not sure if they are the right person, or you just feel kind of sketchy, like, I don't know who this person is, why they're asking these questions. First thing to check is their ID badge. They will have a vertical ID badge, a horizontal ID badge that has like a picture ID, and it will have the Census Bureau logo. They will also have a Census Bureau bag with the Census Bureau logo. If at any point people feel like this is not the right person, that they're asking all these questions, that's the phone number to call, 1-800-923-8282. And you'll be able to report if you feel that the person who's knocking on your door does not work from the Census Bureau and is probably trying to take some information. Now, as we talked about how within Houston, there is a lot of fraud, this is what I mean. Like, we want to make sure that we can properly inform our community so they're not giving their information away. Now, Houston Action, we are doing canvassing, or at least we were until the COVID interrupted everything. And when we talk to the community about the census or taking the pledge to fill out the census, one of the things we mentioned, we start off with, is that we are not the Census Bureau, because we want to make sure that they know that what they're doing is taking a pledge to fill out the census and that they're not filling it out with them. So as we move our tactics from canvassing to phone banking, we are calling the community to remind them that the census is out, that they can self-respond right now, and then they can give that information. So that way everybody gets counted in the census. Another big change because of COVID, is the non-response follow-up. So like I mentioned before, it's been delayed to May 27th through August 14th. There was a mobile questionnaire assistance operation that has been paused. But that I mean that they had this plan to have the computers set up where they would go into neighborhoods for folks who may not have had a computer. And then they would be able to respond to the census through the mobile questionnaire census operator. But that has been paused at the moment, meaning that it's not, but we don't know if that's going to continue, that we're going to have to wait and see what comes out of it. Now, another thing I think deserves mentioning too is the American Community Survey. So the American Community Survey is not the census questionnaire. And I know that, I think Diana asked, what's that? It's a good question. A lot of people don't know what the American Community Survey is, and a lot of folks confuse the American Community Survey with other surveys. So almost all the surveys have been discontinued coming in from the Bureau. The American Community Survey affects, for example, commerce. It's done randomly, so it doesn't go to every household. Some folks might have seen the American Community Survey come to their household as early as November of last year, I want to say, or October. Like, people were getting these different surveys and people were to fill them out. Those are discontinued for the moment, or have been paused because we don't want, I guess the Bureau doesn't want people to confuse one survey with the census, which is a really good move in our opinion. And then there's a lot of other ongoing surveys that the Census Bureau is going to make connections via phone instead of sending out information. But remember that that the census questions, the Census Bureau will most likely not be calling people unless they change their tactics within the next month or so. But they most likely will not be calling you to ask you the census survey questions. The different languages that are currently for language assistance is over the phone are Spanish, Vietnamese, Russian, Tagalog, French, Portuguese, Chinese, and by Chinese I mean Mandarin and Cantonese, Korean, Arabic, Polish, Haiti, Creole, Japanese. The paper form are in English and in Spanish only though. I don't think that they're gonna make the paper form in any other languages. But what this ultimately means that if folks want to talk to somebody in the Bureau, they can actually call in the Bureau and fill out the census application if they don't know how to use the online website or they don't know how to fill out the form in paper. So this gives more accessibility, especially to senior citizens and immigrants who do not know how to answer the census questionnaire or just a bit concerned about whether they're going to do it right or not on paper. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a long list of paper forms that have different languages because most of the communities who aren't really savvy when on the internet, it would help them a lot. But this is a great option. One thing to keep in mind though, as we're helping and supporting the community, is that the census questions can only be answered only a Census Bureau officer, by that I mean either an enumerator or an officer, can fill out the census questionnaire with the person. That means that we as community members cannot fill out the census questionnaire for somebody else. Like they have to do it themselves. We want to make sure that we could support them, point them in the right direction, and then they would make a step-by-step process. However, the great thing about the census too is that it only takes one person. So in other words, if in my house, which has happened a lot, growing up, we had 2 or 3 families sometimes living together. It only takes one person to fill out the census for every single person in that household. So if someone in the household doesn't speak English well or doesn't know how to use the internet that well, especially for many families and other people, like outside of Facebook, most of the people I know that are a little, they're immigrants and they're a little older, they really don't know how to use the internet and navigate it that well. So, so knowing that someone in their household can just play with the system and then fill it out for them is how they would get counted. There's also, I've had questions about not only homeless population, but people who, like couch surfers, for example. I had an uncle who was going to stay with us for 3 months, and then 2 years later, he was still living there. Well, they would still get counted through our household because that way we know who's living there, and that person was living in our household, so they would be counted through our census question. So as we're moving forward and seeing how COVID has been affecting us and what we're doing to get counted, I'm glad and I'm very happy to be able to support everyone online. Thank you all for being part of the Zoom video. I know that this is new for a lot of people. I did not expect my dog to be bothering me so much this morning. So he was excited as well, as I can tell. But we want to do as much work as possible to be able to support people, even if we can't go out in the field and even if we can't see one-on-one. So one of the first things I wanted to cover was go through this census video. I'm going to press play, and if you want to just like give me a thumbs up if you can hear the video, or if you cannot, just feel free to unmute yourself. But this is going to be a step-by-step process of how you can fill out the census in your. So it'll start off with going to the.
The online questionnaire is available in English and 12 non-English languages. To select a language, click on the globe icon and select the name of the language, or select the name of the language at the bottom of any screen. This video will show a step-by-step demonstration. Keep watching. You will need to complete the 2020 census in one session. If you leave, you will have to start over. To begin, choose Start Questionnaire. First, enter your 12-digit census ID. If you do not have a census ID, select the link below the login button and answer some additional questions about your address. You will still be able to respond. Then, confirm that you are completing the 2020 census questionnaire for the address shown. Select yes or no. If you will be staying at this address on April 1st, choose yes. Otherwise, choose no. The next button takes you forward, and the previous button takes you back. Do not use the forward or back buttons on your browser, or else you may need to start over. Next, enter your name and telephone number. Enter your full name. Sometimes a message may appear on the screen that asks you to check your response or enter additional information. Review what you entered before selecting the next button. Enter the number of people, including yourself, who will be living or staying at this address on April 1st, 2020. Click on the underlined blue links for help with the question. Make sure that you count people where they usually live and sleep. If someone does not have a usual residence, count them where they will be staying on April 1st. Include babies and children of all ages, close or extended family members, people who are not related to you, and people staying here without a permanent place to live. Do not include anyone who lives away from this address most of the year, such as college students, armed forces personnel, people in a nursing home, mental hospital, jail, prison, detention center, etc., or people visiting who usually live and sleep somewhere else. These people will be counted in other ways. Then, list the name of each person living or staying at this address. To add more people, select the button labeled Add Another Person. We do not want to miss any people staying at this address on April 1st. If you forgot to include anyone who stays here, choose Yes and enter those names. Otherwise, choose No. Now you're ready for the next two questions about the home at this address. On April 1st, will a house, apartment, or mobile home at this address be owned by you or someone in this household with a mortgage or loan, including home equity loan, owned by you or someone in this household free and clear without a mortgage or loan, rented, or occupied without payment of rent? Then, select the names of the owners or renters of this house, apartment, or mobile home. Next, we ask some questions about each person you listed earlier. First, we ask if the person is male or female. We also ask you to enter the month, day, and year this person was born. Make sure that the age that appears is correct as of April 1st, 2020. Next, we asked about Hispanic origin and race. Please answer both this and the next question. Select whether this person is not of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, Mexican, Mexican-American, or Chicano, Puerto Rican, Cuban, or another Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. If you selected the last response, enter more details in the box below. Next, we ask about race. Select one or more checkboxes. White, Black or African American, American Indian or Alaska Native, Chinese, Filipino, Asian Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, other Asian, Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Chamorro, other Pacific Islander, or some other race. Enter detailed origins in the boxes that look like this. Additional people will also see this question. How is this person related to the reference person? Select opposite sex husband, wife, or spouse, opposite sex unmarried partner, same-sex husband, wife, or spouse, same-sex unmarried partner, biological son or daughter, adopted son or daughter, stepson or stepdaughter, brother or sister, father or mother, grandchild, parent-in-law, son-in-law or daughter-in-law, other relative, roommate or housemate, foster child, or other non-relative. We're almost finished. Some people live or stay in more than one place, and we need to make sure everyone is only counted once. Select the name of anyone who usually lives or stays somewhere else. Otherwise, choose none of the above. If a person does usually live or stay somewhere else, select the reason why from the following: to be with a parent, grandparent, or other person, to attend college, or a military assignment, to be closer to a job or business, in a nursing home or group home, in a jail or prison, as a seasonal or second resident, or for another reason. Great job. You are now ready to send your responses. Select Submit Questionnaire to complete the 2020 census. You will see a confirmation page with your address and today's date. That's it. You have completed the 2020 census online. Thank you. You may now close the website.
So it's a fairly simple process, right? It's a step-by-step on how to fill out the census. It does take, I mean, when I did it, it took like 4 minutes, but that's also just me and my partner. Larger families, it might take a little longer. But access to internet is also a challenge for many folks. So not everyone has access to internet services, which means that people who this might be a little easier to, it might not necessarily be accessible to. What we're really lucky in Houston, though, is that we're working with the libraries, and libraries have opened up their computer labs for people to fill out the census. That might look different right now, considering what's happened with COVID, but the process is there, and we want to be able to make sure that people know how to fill out the census question. So one thing to remember too is that you can practice actually. So let's say you want to figure out how to do this before you actually get into filling out the census. If you Google, for those who are on the call who might not be able to see it, but if you Google just practices answering the census, this is going to be one of the links to show up. But if you go to this link, the way you know that it's different from the real one, the census questionnaire, is that the real questionnaire looks exactly like this online without the little circle question marks on across the page. And you can actually start the questionnaire, and you can read every question step by step. Remember that you can't press back. If you do on the real census questionnaire, it'll erase everything. You can't press back from your browser, but you can press back on the bottom of the screen that tells you that you're in the survey. You also won't be able to leave the survey for too long. And the practice run, it might hold it, which I think it has done it before. But from what the Bureau has said around when you actually answer the census question, it will only be able to hold it for like 13 minutes. If you leave the computer unattended for more than 13 minutes, this means that you will not be able to necessarily respond to the census. Sorry, let me rephrase that. You won't be able to start where you left off. So you want to make sure that you stay there. And the reason behind this is that we don't want someone to be at a public place, start filling out the census, and then forget that it's there, and then someone else uses the computer, and then they might be able to see all your information. So it's more than anything is to make sure that your information stays private and that someone else can't steal your info. But if you want to get more resources, Houston in Action, we have been working with different organizations. And if you go to our website at HoustonInAction.org, one of the places to check out is our event section. And then after you go through our event section, you're going to get a list of all the events that are going on. Many things have been moved online. So if you wanted to see how this event, for example, Getting Counted Census 2020, you can see that it's right there, March 22nd, 9:30 to 10:45 at Zoom, which means that it's open to people. Anybody who wanted to join, they would actually just go to the link, and then from there they'll be able to contact us. Be able to join us through Zoom. If you want to see or share this with anybody in your community, send them to our event site at the HoustonAction.org, and they might be able to get on another Zoom video or another virtual hangout where they can talk to people and they can be able to assist them to how to fill out the census. Another thing to remember is that in response to COVID and how what's been happening, we also developed a resource document, and this is a page that you can find on our website as well that will support. Will help you get resources and best practices. So if you go through our online website, you go to collection of best practices and resources for COVID, you'll actually be able to open a document. They will go through different hyperlinks that'll give you accessibility. Like the food bank, there's blogs. We know that even Legacy Clinic, I think, is offering free screenings for COVID. As we get more and more updates from what's available and the resources that people can get, that will be inside our website too. So if someone is concerned and trying to figure out what's happening in Houston with it, this is a great place to do it. Even the Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative has resources for immigrants in the community. For folks who are calling in to the Census Bureau, these are all the languages that they currently have available for people who want to call in. The way to recognize that if you're dialing the Census Bureau at the moment, all the numbers usually end with 2020. So there's English, it's 844-330-2020. Spanish is 844-468-2020. But they also have Mandarin, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Tagalog, Polish, French, Asian Creole, Portuguese, Japanese. I know it says Puerto Rico residents is a different number, but that's also English. Spanish for Puerto Rican residents. And then telephone display service. So those are also for people with disabilities who will be able to call in. There's also video options and how to fill it out. On our website, you'll also be able to find a link to it. So if somebody is deaf or mute, they can actually go through our website and get the videos from the Census Bureau and how to exactly like the same video that we just went through. Houston in Action, we also have a hotline. So if you know somebody who needs more help in filling it out and wants to get locally resourced, they can call our phone number at 281-305-8300, and we'll be able to connect them with these resources. We are not helping people fill out the application. We want to connect them with the resources where people can. So I know we're out of time, and I thank everyone for participating. This is my contact information. If at any point you want to reach out to me, but I also wanted to open up with the last couple of minutes to see if y'all had any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
How can we help make sure all the precious humans are counted? What can St. Philip do to let everyone know that all are welcome? If you know, a little play on words for my fellow San Philippians.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things you can do. Giving general information, completely fine. You will no problem in doing that. I also find it, like I said before, tying into people's values, because you have a congregation, even bringing it up, like in biblical times, they talked about the census, like it's as far as counting people within a community. So tying it into that is important to highlight the importance of it. But giving them access to our hotline number could be something that they can just call in, or direct a phone number to the Bureau so they'll be able to answer it. I'm not sure if folks, what their accessibility to the internet is to fill out the form, but encouraging them to talk to their children or their grandchildren to help them fill out the census, it would be important. I mean, there's a lot you can do, but ultimately, what I would remind ourselves is that we can't necessarily fill out the form for them, and we can't really go question by question filling out the form. But if you want to send them to our website, they can get connected to other people or other organizations who are supporting them fill out the census, have questions, and definitely giving them the resources to contact the Census Bureau. But for us, like, it always seems that tying it to people's values, making them feel that what is urgent about the census has always helped. Does that answer your question, or did you have a different?
Yes, no, that answered it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
How does this affect dreamers?
How does this affect what? Excuse me.
Dreamers.
Dreamers.
Yes.
So the census is going to affect everyone who lives in the country, whether their immigrant status, whether they're undocumented or not. So, for example, if there are immigrants who are either residents or documented or have a visa, but there's funding that goes into those communities, there's federal funding that goes for resources in that community. If they're not counted, then whenever those organizations apply for grants or try to get federal funding, there's less funding coming into that community. So it affects undocumented and immigrant community as it would affect everyone else. If you're not counted through the census, there's less resources coming into the community.
Do you think that ICE could take advantage of this situation?
So that is a really good question, and a question that concerns me as much as a lot of people. At the moment, the way it stands, that the census does not share information with ICE or DHS. As I mentioned earlier about Title 13, which I think the slide might not be in here. But Title 13 does not allow the Census Bureau information to be shared. Census enumerators and officers have to fill out a written agreement that they won't share this information out of the Bureau. And if they do, they can be fined or put in jail. So it shouldn't, but I will highlight a caveat, like there is fear in terms of how this administration is collecting the data and what its intention is for it. There is fear in what change could happen in the future that I cannot predict. But currently where it stands, ICE does not have access to any of this information. And I wish I can give you like a more uplifting information right now, but unfortunately, I'd rather stick to like the fact of it versus making it seem like everything's okay. So in my stance, like even if I talk to people who are undocumented and they feel like me telling them Article 13 and that the census doesn't share information, that might not change anything. They might not still be concerned. They'll be like, I don't care if they're not going to share. I still don't agree with it. There's a lot less and less trust in government in the last couple of years as well, which means that there's a lot of people who still don't know that this is safe for them. But what we want to do is inform them and empower them to make the best decision. Any other questions?
Just a comment to say thank you so much for being here with us today. It meant a lot.
Well, thank you, Sam, and I do appreciate all of you. I know starts in a bit. Oh, but I think Mikey had a question.
I was just curious. Suppose your mother is Black and your father white. What do you do on the census?
Yeah, and here's where it comes to like, to me, it's almost philosophical too. It's like, how do you identify yourself? So you could write in like in the other section, like what you are, different descriptions for it. They might say biracial, depending on how they identify or how society identifies. They might write in Black, right? Depending on who they are. Where it gets really complicated, not only for biracial parents. I'll give you an example. To a lot of Arab communities, and they tell me, you know, the census always counts us as white, but we never get treated like we're white. So like, why would we like answer like to that? And it gets complicated, but luckily that the checking the other box and writing it in would allow that person to write in whatever they feel like whatever it is that they identify within the race and ethnicity. So it's not a perfect system, unfortunately, where they can write one Black parent, one white parent. But because the Census Bureau will get information from their parents, then if one person is Black and another person is white, like those would be answered previously, and then the child would be their child. So there isn't like a complete description that I can give you. This is what it has to be like. I interpret it as it's going to be a little messy, and I'm not sure how the Bureau is going to count all that information, to be honest.
When they ask about, so like I heard from a friend when they ask what race and then they follow up with a country of origin, is that the country of origin kind of optional, or like what's the realistic expectation on responses there? Because like my family goes back several generations before it's out of the country.
Well, there isn't necessarily a country of origin in there. It's kind of like if you're white and Irish, like you can write that to be more specific, but you don't necessarily have to specify it. Those are like optionals too. So that they might have, you might write that as part of like an identifier of your race, but it's not like it's tracking it. For example, the big questions that I have there are on Hispanic or Latino, and that's because you can be Hispanic and Asian at the same time. And you can be Hispanic and white or Hispanic and Black. So there's a separation between those questions because of the large population of Hispanic or Latino within in the US. But there's also like Hispanic and Mexican, right? So Mexican isn't the only Latino or Hispanic. So it gets a little tricky, like I said, in how you fill it out. You could write in like more specificity of your country of origin in terms of the definition of your race, but you don't necessarily have to. So if all your family is Irish and you want to put in white and you leave the Irish blank, it doesn't necessarily change, and it still will allow you to continue moving forward because you would be counted as white. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you really deserve all the encouragement and support and praise you can get because you're doing a miraculous job. So important. We feel that it's a privilege that you would share this with us, and please know that we give you our best wishes. Hope that this goes well, and it will because of you. Houston will be a lot better off because of you.
Well, I really appreciate the kind words, Mickey.
Amen.
Thank you, Sam. And this information is out here for y'all. I can share the PowerPoint today with Mickey if you wanted to get some of the resources and check the links. Please feel free to do so. The recording is going to take me a bit just to get us from the cloud and to move forward. But I thank you for your time. Thank you for being patient with me and my dog who would not leave me alone for the first 40 minutes of this. But I really appreciate it.
Your dog rocks.
Yes, he does. And I know that y'all have, I think, Mass today, right? So I don't want to keep y'all too much because we're almost at that time. I want to be respectful of your time.
Thank you. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And when you're able to get a tape of this out, a recording, we'll send it to everybody on the mailing list because everybody needs to know about you.
Okay, will do. Thank you so much, Mickey. Y'all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.